you know, in the end, like, life is prosaic again, and, you know, how long does that high last?
Well, sure, but I mean...
Because the high is only, also, sorry to interrupt, but the high is only as high as you were feeling oppressed before. If you weren't feeling oppressed, because, like, I don't get this at all, because I never worried about my personal salvation.
Even when you were a kid?
Certainly not after about age 12 or 13.
Okay.
Or 14. So before then, it's more murky, and yeah, I probably did. But certainly not after 12, 13, 14. But only if you were feeling oppressed and worried about, you know, how God was judging you and whether you'd be saved. Only if you sowed in tears could you reap in joy.
Sure. Well, you know, so here, I mean, so much of this goes back to Luther. So let's just revisit him for a second. I mean, Luther's somebody who is shaped by late medieval Catholic piety, and for him, you know, I think a sense of being under divine judgment came very naturally. Of course, you know, it's not just what he hears in church, it's not just the relationship he has with his father, it's also the fact that he's, you know, he's an Augustinian monk, and so Augustine's own experience of, I think, great inner turmoil is there kind of forming him. Well, you know, the Lutheran theologian Wolfhard Pannenberg points out that centuries later, late medieval Catholic piety was long gone, but people, notably in the Lutheran tradition, sort of felt like authentic Christian experience is experience like Luther's. So what do? They create church environments in which that experience gets replicated. So, you know, what came naturally to Luther now has to be deliberately cultivated with a certain kind of preaching, a certain kind of evangelism.
Yeah, my dad would whip them up. You know.
So I think if that's right, and I think it is, then it seems to me finally the same sort of thing is true here. You extend the half-life of that experience because you're in a church setting that keeps feeding.
They do it every, like, they'll start the sermon with, how will you ever be right with God?
Yeah.
How will you ever climb the shaking sides of Sinai? You know, how will you ever live up to God's law? How will you, who is sinful, come into God's presence?
Right.
Whip it up again, and then here's the answer.
Right.
And so people can vicariously feel that.
So I think that extends the half-life considerably if you can manipulate people's emotions in that way.
Right. Yeah, because I've been to church, you know, maybe 5 times in the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. But those times when I did, it was like firing up the troops again. It was like taken through that journey from being lost to being saved, and firing them up again. And you could see people kind of going through that journey in church, and coming out, you know, yeah, I'm saved and ready to face the week.
I mean, it's clearly not what you find in every congregation on every Sabbath, and I would guess it's less common now than 20 years ago. But I think it's easy to see how, at least in settings where that was the case, there wouldn't be any necessary upper limit on how long, you know, that could persist.